the Chelsea area.
Sorry about that. I had forgotten to launch the recording. The meeting is being recorded. Sorry about that, Leonie.
And that's for 4th through 8th grade. Again, you can see the blue line is for Council District 3, even higher than the increase in class size in 4th through 8th grade citywide. The high school class sizes continue to go down for reasons we don't really understand, but they're very unequal across the city. So there were still more than 232,000 students in classes of 30 or more, and that's a minimum amount because we're only counting high school social studies classes that large. And you can see how many very large high school classes there are in that chart. So what about the proposed executive budget for next year? The DOE, the Department of Education cuts are more than $1 billion. Much of that is due to not expanding 3K as previously planned, and also vacancy reductions for school safety agents. That means they're not going to be replaced. But the DOE budget is notoriously non-transparent, and it's very hard to interpret from what the information we have about what's going to be happening overall and to school budgets. The mayor claimed no service reductions, layoffs, or cuts to school budgets or classrooms, but he claimed that last year as well, when school budgets were cut by over $1 billion. And that also contradicts testimony in March by the chancellor to the city council, who said, yes, school budgets would be cut. The projected enrollment declines are less than 1% for next year, which is good news. However, it depends on whether they're going to impose now additional cuts based upon past enrollment declines. Because last year, for example, they didn't impose all the cuts that would be due to enrollment declines, but they backstopped that with about $160 million of federal funding. The Fair Student Funding formula is complicated. It's also derived from the average teacher salary, and last year they cut $26 per student, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot, and it's twice as much for high needs students based upon a supposed decline in the average teacher salary. We don't know what, they don't reveal what the average teacher salary is going to be for next year. So that's another source of possible cuts for schools. They are also cutting more than $24 million for vacancy reductions, which sounds like school staffing. And they changed the Fair Student formula to say $90 million more to high need schools, but there's no indication in the executive budget for another $90 million, which means that other schools may be cut by that amount. Just last week, they announced a new literacy curriculum and new teacher training for $35 million. That's not listed in the executive budget. In any case, it won't allow schools to rehire the approximately 4,000 K-12 teachers that they've lost over the last 5 years. And there is a list, there's a chart showing how many K-12 teachers we've lost over the last 5 years. We don't have the figures for last year because they still haven't reported to the city council what the head count was last year. In any case, we believe schools should be getting more money, not less, to help them restore the programs they lost and reduce class sizes. According to the Office of Management Budget, they don't plan to add a single additional teacher through at least June 2025. And yet the IBO projects New York City will end the year with a nearly $5 billion surplus. That was, I don't know whether that's the latest number or not, but that's a recent number. We had cash balances of $14.6 billion. We're also slated, our schools, to receive about $500 million in additional state foundation funding, which was a result of a lawsuit that was filed many years ago called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. It is the third year of a 3-year phase-in of about $1.3 billion in extra state funding, in which class size was a central, if not the central issue in the case. And the tweaks that have been made to the Fair Student Funding formula ignores how it's aligned to very large classes. So all this has to be seen in the context of a new state law that was passed last June and signed by the governor into law in September. It requires New York City to be reducing class sizes in all grades starting in the fall. Capping class sizes in K through 3 to no more than 20, 23 in 4 through 8, 25 in high school. I showed you how many classes before that, or how many students were in classes of 30 or more. Each year, starting next fall, about 20% of all classes have to be aligned with those caps, and then an additional 20% every year from now on. And the city's supposed to prioritize schools with high poverty first. We will make the first year. This year, about 38% of the classes made the caps compared to 42% last year. In school district 2, we don't have the council district data, but we know school district 2, which overlaps with Chelsea, about 43% of classes made the cap compared to 48% last year. So we will make the first year caps, but the out years are very uncertain. So this is the projected enrollment, K-12 enrollment for next year that we just got from the DOE. You can see that school district 2 enrollment is projected to go up a little bit. We don't know what's going to happen with the immigrants, the migrants who continue to flow into the city. This already led to more than 15,000 new students this year. Our biggest concern is around the capital plan, and this is an issue that I've discussed with Layla in the past. 38% of our students are in overcrowded schools. According to last year's DOE data, we don't have this year's data yet, and yet they're cutting the amount spent on new capacity. They already cut $1.5 billion in the plan adopted last June, and then this plan that was just proposed in February cuts another $820 million. Together, that cuts 22,000 seats out of the capital plan. Just when we need more space, not less, to lower class size. It takes about 5 years to site and build a school, and then therefore it's really time is of the essence to start siting and building those schools if we're going to make the 5-year timeline. This is just a chart showing new capacity seats. We started at 57,480. We're now down to 46,000 in the capital plan, but a lot of those seats are funded just for design, not to be built. So the actual number has gone from about 56,000 to about 35,000. And this is where you can see the cuts in the number of seats by district. You can see 262 were cut in District 2, and an unknown number were moved into the category of funded for design only. This is what we are seeing in future years in terms of new school seats. You can see that starting in 2024, there's a radical fall in the number of new seats. And this is interesting to me anyway. This is the percentage of schools in the city's total capital plan on many infrastructure needs, their 10-year capital strategy funding. In fiscal 14, schools made up 37%, and now it's down to 11%. So we also need reforms to admissions policies, because sometimes very overcrowded schools sit very close by undercrowded schools, and that would significantly lower the number of new seats that would have to be built. However, the chancellor right now and the deputy chancellor say they're not considering doing that. So there are 2 laws that were passed in 2018. Neither of them have been complied with by the DOE or the School Construction Authority. One, to make the data sources that they build their capital plan around and their seats needs estimates more transparent by including the actual latest data that they're using in their methodology. They have not complied with that law. They also have not complied with another law which created a school siting task force that was supposed to analyze all the empty lots in the city to assess whether they were suitable to build schools, because there's often funding for school construction and there's no school built because the SCA says they can't find sites. But they ruled out a lot of sites, city-owned sites, for reasons that made no sense, and they still haven't analyzed more than 22,000 privately owned sites. And that's 5 years after the deadline of this law that they were supposed to do this. So these are their budget priorities for 2024 for the City Council. We believe the City Council should demand to know how much school budgets are going to be cut if the executive budget is adopted, and they should refuse to make any more cuts, and to the extent possible, restore the cuts that they made last year. Many of you may have heard that after they voted to adopt the city council to the mayor's budget, they said they regretted it. They asked the mayor for an opportunity to re-vote so that they could restore the cuts to schools. The mayor didn't let them do that, but now they have an opportunity to do that. They should also make sure that the capital plan is expanded, not cut, and has the space necessary to meet the benchmarks in the new class size law. We also have a lot of proposals about improving the transparency of the DOE budget, which is very, very non-transparent, including having a new unit of appropriation that reflects the actual level of school budgets, school-based budgets, and to amend the class size reporting law, which right now is not detailed enough for us to be able to identify which schools are complying with the law and which ones are not. And the DOE and the SEA should be made to comply with these two laws that were passed in 2018. So how can you help? If you're interested in helping, you can subscribe to our newsletter. We're holding a parent action conference on June 10th, where a lot of these issues, including the school-based budgets and class size, will be gone into in more depth. They're also, the DOE's holding borough hearings in the month of June on their class size reduction plan, which they still have not released. And if you have any questions, you can email me at that email. So that's my presentation.
Well, thank you so much. It's going to take me a while to absorb it all.
Yes.
And maybe people won't have to email you because we'll have some time. They can ask you questions directly. Okay.
Great.
But thanks for all this material and from your perspective on what's going on. I mean, bouncing back and forth. I mean, I guess most of us are familiar with, we actually have two different budgets. We have an expense budget and we have a capital budget. And you were making references to both of those. And so keep that in mind, everyone. We got an expense budget and a capital budget. And expense budget is for the one fiscal year, the capital budget goes forward. Behind the expense budget, we also have a plan that goes for another 4 years or so. Not as detailed, of course, as the budget itself. And one more comment before IBO jumps in, before I invite you to jump in.
Can I ask a question?
Hold on, please, Tito. Questions come, just hold on a second. Right now, where we are in the process, the budget process, New York City's budget, fiscal year begins July 1st, goes to June 30th the following year, okay? Mayor makes a preliminary budget back in January, February. Then we have give and take back and forth, adopts a plan, revises the plan. Next is the executive budget, which comes out in April, which just came out. And the city council is the final determiner. Just be aware of that. It's the city council that approves the budget. And so there's a negotiation going on. That's what I assume is going on right now, or at least will be happening in the next couple of weeks. So that's where we are. We're sort of in the middle of the budget process right now. And again, this is the expense budget. IBO, I'm sorry, Tito, is your question for Leonie?
Yeah, it's to the lady that just spoke.
Yeah, well, we'll have questions and answers after all our presenters present.
Well,
Okay.
then you'll mix up two issues and
We'll
it'll
have
be-
whatever issues we're going to have, Tito.
wait a minute. Let me finish. The problem is we're going to get more information and it'll be
And-
a lot of information to absorb. So
Yeah,
I'd rather ask my question.
Absolutely.
now.
I'm sorry,
I'd rather-
Tito. The way we described the process of the program tonight, each of the presenters will present, then we're going to have questions and answers. So thank you and hold it.
Right, exactly.
Okay, Lisa and Brian?
I'll forget
Yes.
this.
So, hi, just to, I don't know if everybody was here when I started speaking earlier. My name is Lisa Neary. I'm the Chief of Staff at the Independent Budget Office. And Burt, you were almost right. Just to give you a little background on the Independent Budget
Never
Office.
completely right.
It was established by the Charter Revision Commission in 1989 that many of you may know, made substantial changes to city government structure. It took quite a while for the IBO to actually open its doors because there was significant resistance from the powers that be, the mayor in particular, to the existence of an office like the Independent Budget Office. We, by charter mandate, provide sort of soup to nuts information on the city budget, from basic budget process information, which Brian is going to present to you, to the more complex and longer analysis of specific topics related to the budget and city policy. But we do it all from a nonpartisan stance. So that is our sort of unique role. We have very strong access to information authority under the charter, and an established mandated budget that is a percentage of OMB's budget. So that's sort of background. I've been at the IBO for, I don't even want to tell you how long. I started there as the general counsel, and I moved into the chief of staff role maybe a couple of years ago now. But I'm going to turn over the mic, so to speak, to Brian Kane, who has been with IBO for a little under a year. He is our budget review and labor analyst. It's hard for me to believe he's only been there or been with us for less than a year, because he's become sort of an essential key player in the whole office. So I'm very happy to be able to introduce him to you all. As always, please know that we are here to answer your questions and to make presentations like this. And we're happy to be here. So thank you, Brian. I'm going to turn over the mic to you.
Great, and thank you very much, Lisa, for that compliment, and thank you all for having us tonight. So as Lisa said, I am the budget review and labor analyst. I'm going to be talking about 3 different topics tonight. First is explaining who the Independent Budget Office is and what we do. The second is going to be going through some budget basics that I think Burt just beat me to a little bit, but I'll still go through them. And the executive budget plan that just came out and IBO's analysis of it. And please feel free at any point to interrupt me and ask me clarifying questions, or unless we want to stick to the schedule and do questions at the end. Either way.
We'll do questions at the end, Brian. I think
All
it's easier. Then everybody can raise their hand.
Sounds good. So to get started, the Independent Budget Office is a nonpartisan city agency that provides data-driven fiscal and policy insights into New York City's government and services. And so we provide mandated reports that are in alignment with major budget actions and we answer questions from elected officials and the public. What IBO does not do is we do not make policy recommendations. We're not a think tank. We just provide nonpartisan information for decision makers and for the public to be better informed. There are 3 major types of reports that we put out. The first is charter mandated reports, and I'm going to go into these in a little more detail soon, but basically these are composed of a revenue forecast or projection that we do independent of the city's version, and repricings or re-estimates of expenditure items, and then those net out into our estimate of the gap or the surplus between revenues and expenditures. We also have a lot of reports that come from city council member requests or community boards or really any request from anyone. And so if you ever have an idea of something that you think that we could investigate for you, shoot us an email. We try to be very transparent and have our emails on our website. And we can go back and forth on whether that is something that IBO is able to research. And then lastly, we also have some internally driven research questions that our internal experts come up with on their own. And this is a slide that'll be more helpful once we actually send this presentation around, which we're happy to do after this, but it's got links to several really helpful resources on our website. The first is a 10 to 20 page explainer that, despite it being 10 to 20 pages, is a very succinct description of the budget process that will go into a little bit more detail than I'm able to go into tonight. And then we also provide a lot of data that, like Lisa says, we have access to a great breadth of data in this related to the city budget. And often that data comes in a form that's very hard to understand for the average person that doesn't get to work with it all the time like we do. So we try to package it in a way that is more usable and interpretable. So that's IBO. To get into the budget process, basically the New York City budget, and specifically we're talking about the operating budget here, so this is a good distinction from the capital budget. We're going to focus on the operating budget for tonight. But the operating budget is a blueprint for how the city government is going to spend its money, expenditures, how much the city expects to receive in taxes, in grants, in other funding sources like fines and fees, and then a balance between the two. The expenditures and revenues need to equal each other in the current and the upcoming fiscal year. And when the revenues are higher than expenditures, what normally happens is that excess is applied to next year's expenditures so that the current year still equals revenue and expenditures. So as Burt was saying, this is the budget process. The fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So we are actually fast approaching the next fiscal year of 2024. The adopted budget needs to be finalized by the city council and the mayor before June 30th. After that point, a few months later in November, we will see the first quarter plan, which is really an update or a progress report on how the current fiscal year is going. And it's our first very critical look of the budget for 2025. And that's the first time that IBO is charter mandated to release a report on the budget. 2 months later, we get the preliminary budget from the mayor. This is the first budget where revenues and expenditures for 2025 will need to balance. They technically don't need to in the November plan, but they normally do anyway. And that's the second time that IBO releases a mandated report. And then what happened on April 26th, and almost always happens right at the end of April, is the executive budget is released by the mayor. And this also reflects spending to date in the current fiscal year, the mayor's best estimate for the upcoming budget. And it often reflects the state budget and impacts to the city budget that the state budget has. However, this year was interesting because the state budget was so delayed that the city budget, or the executive budget, had to come out before the state budget was published. So the mayor and the Office of Management and Budget, who created the executive budget, weren't able to include a handful of items that were in the state budget that they just couldn't know about because it wasn't published yet. So that is the point where we are in the fiscal budget process. And between now and June, we have a handful of other steps that are going to occur. So as I said, on April 26th, the executive budget was published. IBO released our analysis of that budget on this previous Monday. And I encourage any of you to read that if you're interested in diving further than I'm able to go tonight. During the month of May and probably part of June, the City Council will hold public hearings on the executive budget by committee. And these are open to the public, of course. And so if you are interested in going, I encourage you to check out the City Council website and their calendar. And by June 30th, the mayor and city council will negotiate and finalize the adopted budget for fiscal year 2024. So that's the budget process as quickly as I can make it. And now we're going to go into what was in the executive budget that came out just under a month ago. This is the headline table from IBO's report that we released Monday. It's our projection of the city budget. And as you can see, in 2023, we're projecting that revenue will be a little over $109 billion and expenditures will be over $107 billion. That leaves us with a surplus of $2.1 billion. But like we said, revenues need to equal expenditures in the current year. So what's probably going to happen is that excess will be applied to 2024. And coincidentally, that actually brings our projection for 2024 into balance as well. So those 2 years we're very comfortable with, actually. It's 2025 through 27 that we are keeping an eye on, because as we can see, there are fairly sizable gaps of 5.8 billion to 7.7 billion in those years that they're projecting currently. It's not abnormal for out years to have large gaps at this time, but these are a little bit higher than we typically see. And so we're keeping an eye on them because things in the budget will need to change, such as revenues increasing or expenditures decreasing in those years to eventually get into balance. So next I was going to go into the three major areas where IBO made adjustments to the executive budget. There's many more, and we go into all of these in our report that we released Monday, but these are the biggest three, and they pertain to education, asylum seeker services, and personnel costs. So the Department of Education has the largest city budget of any agency. It's about a third of the entire city budget. So even though we are increasing, our estimate increases the DOE budget by about $4 billion over these 5 years, that isn't as large as it sounds as a percentage of their budget. So just flagging that this isn't like a cause for alarm inherently in how large the numbers are. But we have certain things that we increase the budget for and certain things that offset that by decreasing the budget. In terms of increases, some of the larger items are an increased budget for Carter cases. And for anyone not familiar, these are basically cases where families send their students to a private school because they believe the public school could not satisfy their special needs, and they need to file legal action and get the city to reimburse them for the cost of that private school. And so the number of these cases has been increasing over time, and the budget does not yet reflect that. So we increased the budget there. There's also a large amount of federal stimulus funding from the COVID bills of 2021 that are being used to fund Department of Education programs right now. And a lot of these programs are programs that we are pretty confident at IBO will continue after the funding runs out in 2025. So the city's going to need to pick up that cost. So offsetting these increases to the DOE budget, we decrease it by our estimate of charter school costs. We've been seeing sluggish enrollment in charter schools. Yes, we've been seeing sluggish enrollment in charter schools. Sorry, I think someone.
I'm sorry, someone please mute.
Susan, can you please mute yourself?
I can keep going anyway. I think the host might be able to mute them. I'm not sure who the host is, but oh great.
Yeah, Layla, can you mute her?
I think we got it. I think we're all set. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, we are projecting lower charter school enrollment than the budget currently assumes, even despite an increase in the number of charter schools from zombie charters. And then lastly, in the education budget that I'll touch on is, like I said, the state budget came out after the city budget. And so the foundation aid that the state budget is providing to the city wasn't in the executive budget, but we expect it will be by the adopted plan. The second major issue or area where we adjusted the expense budget was for asylum seeker services funding. So as many of you probably know, we've had a large influx of asylum seekers in New York City in recent months, and we're not even sure exactly of the trend that population will take, if it's going to be a lot more people or not that many more people. And so projecting the cost of providing services to these asylum seekers is definitely tricky business. The mayor believes that the cost is going to be approximately $4.3 billion over these next 2 years. However, IBO did an analysis with 3 different scenarios. And even in the highest cost scenario that we estimate, we believe that the cost will be about $600 million less than the mayor is expecting. And the baseline, which is our middle scenario, and the one that we actually reflect in our budget, is about $1.2 billion less. And why it's important for us to try to get that accurate, or to try to, not just increase our estimate of budgets, but also decrease, is it's important because these represent funds that, if unused here, they could have gone somewhere else. And it's no secret that we have a very finite amount of resources in New York City. And so if things are being budgeted that don't need to be in a certain place and they could be somewhere else, that's really important information for City Council to know. And lastly, we re-estimated the cost of personnel. I'll go through this rather quickly just because it's a little bit confusing because there's 3 different elements, but I'm happy to go further into this if people are interested in it. But we re-estimated the cost of collective bargaining because the city reached agreements with the 2 major labor unions in the past few months. And so we were able to make an estimate independently from OMB's estimate, and our estimate was about $1.8 billion higher over these 5 years. We're also seeing lower costs than expected in civilian and pedagogical titles because there are a lot of vacancies, and vacancies are positions that are basically allowed to be filled. There's like a maximum number of positions that each agency can fill, and the budget has to reflect all positions, either filled or unfilled. All those unfilled positions end up being savings because if they're not filled, then we don't have to pay anyone for that. And then lastly, uniform personnel costs, we also adjust, partially similar to what I was just explaining with the civilian and pedagogical budget, but uniform agencies also have a lot of overtime costs, and they are often under budgeted. So we increase the budget to reflect that. So that is about as fast as I can go through the budgets. I hope it wasn't too fast, but I'm very excited to hear your questions. Thank you very much, everyone.
I just would like to add, thank you very much, Brian, Lisa. You used the word IBO adjusted the budget. IBO adjusted the budget. I just wanted to be clear that when you say IBO adjusted, what you're really meaning is you project or you think that the budget is really higher, will be higher or will be lower. It's not that you took the mayor's budget and you have some authority to cut it or add to it. When you say adjust, you're really talking about IBO.
Great clarification. Thank you. That's probably a better word, is forecasting or than adjusting. So thank you for clarifying.
You were forecasting, you were projecting ahead. Thank you. Any other questions? I know we have Tito has a question, and I see Francine's hand is up and Leonard's hand is up. Okay, Tito, are you with us? Tito? Your question, please.
He's muted.
You're muted. Tito, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay,
Can
you're
you hear me
unmuted,
now?
Tito. Yes,
Yes, we
yes,
can.
you're unmuted.
I got
Go ahead.
knocked out. I don't know why I got knocked out. Anyway, my question is to the lady that's fighting to make sure we get smaller classrooms than we have now. And I believe her name is Leonie, is that correct?
Leonie.
Leonie, I apologize.
And we want smaller classes. We don't want smaller classrooms.
Right, of course. Well,
People
I'm a
always
native
say
New York.
that, but that's one of my bête noirs. We don't want small classrooms. We want small classes.
I understand. Thank you for the clarification. So I'm a native New Yorker, and this issue has been around since I was in grammar school, at least 60 years ago. And it just keeps on getting worse. And my question to you is, first of all, let me thank you for fighting this fight for as long as you have. But my question is the budget for the privatization, like charter schools also being cut, or are they being increased? Because it appears to me similar to what they do with public housing. They starve the beast so that they can privatize. I don't know. Can you respond to that in any way?
Yes, I can definitely respond to that. So first of all, class size has been a top issue in the city for at least 100 years. You can go back and read New York Times articles in the 1920s about people talking about how, you know, the class sizes in New York City public schools are too big and we really need to do something about it. Now, class sizes have come down over the last 100 years, but more recently, they went up in after the last Great Recession and then sort of leveled off and haven't really declined the way they should, except during the last few years due to enrollment decline. Now, I'm sure Brian has the numbers, but the Office of Management and Budget has said that the charter schools are costing the DOE budget more than $3 billion a year at this point. And even though charters are not expanding at the rate that they were before, they are still increasing in number, and some of them are still increasing in enrollment. And because the amount that we have to spend on charter schools is pegged to the amount we spend on public school students with the lag time in it, that money will go up next year. We reached our cap, meaning over 245 charter schools in New York City, by far the most in the state. But the governor pushed very hard to increase the number even over the cap. So we got 14 more what they call zombie charters, which are charter schools that either never were authorized and never opened, or opened and then closed. And so that will be an additional cost to the school, to the DOE budget going forward. The number of Carter cases, as Brian mentioned, and the number overall of students going to private schools at the expense of the DOE goes up every single year. So basically, we're losing more and more money out of the DOE budget to private schools of various sorts. This is a really big problem, especially when you're trying to reduce class sizes, because not only do you have less money to reduce class sizes, but you also have less space, because many of the charter schools are being co-located in New York City school buildings. We are the only district in the state and in the entire nation which has an obligation to find space for charter schools, either in our overcrowded public schools or pay for their rent in separate spaces. We are the only district in the country with that obligation. We are also the only district in the state that doesn't get reimbursed for some of these charter school expenses. Every other district gets something called charter transitional aid. And we've lost nearly $2 billion in charter transitional aid because for some reason, New York City is exempt from getting that transitional aid from the state. So we are uniquely burdened with costs when it comes to charter schools. And I could go on about this at great length, but I don't think you have time. But I have a separate presentation on charter schools and why the trend in charter schools and the expansion of charter schools is very, very damaging to the DOE budget and to the opportunities of our public school students.
Thank you, Tito, for that question. We got a very, the answer was very explanatory. And maybe someday you can come back and give us a whole presentation on charter schools. And before we get to the next question from Francine, for the first time I have a full view of everybody here, and I see from Community Board 4, our budget person, Leslie Bogosian Murphy, and want to welcome her. And you may all not be aware that Community Board 4, every community board in New York City is part of the budget process because they establish for the community, our Community Board 4, for Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, priorities, budget priorities. After much discussion, and then they adopt them and they send them to the city, to the different agencies and the mayor's office. It's part of the actual responsibility of the community board with the city charter. And after some of the questioning, Leslie, if you'd like to give us a couple of minutes on about that process and how our community board is involved there. But meanwhile, we have Francine and Leonard's question.
Hi. Leonie, in hearing what you have to say about class size, I am struck by one thing, and that is that the city of New York has many, many schools and many facilities, and they are not being used properly. For example, it happens in other countries that you have rolling times so that people start schools at, say, in January, or they start in November, because our schools are empty for so much of the year. When you think about it, they're really used like 4 months, how many months? 8 months out of the year, perhaps. So you have all of these facilities that are not used properly. In my opinion, I've never heard of anything where you would have so much, and yet you keep talking about class size. Well, you can change the class size by changing the way the students are staggered. That's my point of view. And I think it's something that perhaps no one has explored it, or somebody has dismissed it as impossible, but it's not impossible, and it works in other places. Thank you.
Well, a couple things. First of all, several of our large high schools are on double or triple overlapping shifts, which means that kids start going early in the morning and end up later at night. So in that way, there is more flexible use of facilities. There have been lots of suggestions and proposals over the year to make schooling year-round. First of all, we do have a summer school program that uses school buildings in the summer. And in the recent years, it's been pretty ambitious in terms of the number of kids going to summer school. But secondly, in general, parents and families don't really like year-round schooling, and they don't want their kids to have to go to school in the summer because that interferes with vacation plans, et cetera, et cetera. So there are very few school districts across the country that really have 12-month a year sessions. The other thing that's difficult is the teacher contract. Teachers often don't want to work during the summer. And even when they get paid more to work during the summer, it's hard to staff that. So there are barriers to having schools running 12 months a year.
Does anybody from the IBO have a comment on that? Have you ever did a study?
Yes. Has anyone ever done a study about how this could work?
We have been asked about the state mandate vis-a-vis class size, and I know that we're working on it currently, an analysis of the requirement that class size be reduced.
Well, we're all looking to see the report when it comes out. You can see we're all anticipating something. Okay. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Lazarin. My question really is to Ms. Neary and Mr. Kane about sort of the big picture of the city budget. Could you, you gave us great details, and thank you for that. And thank you, Ms. Haimson, for that, Haimson, excuse me, for your presentation. I think they were really amazing. But my question is, could you give us some of the big picture, like some categories of where the city budget expenditures are the greatest? I think you indicated that the Department of Education is 1/3 of the budget. What other large expenditures are there for the city budget? For example, uniform services, is the Health and Hospitals Corporation part of the city budget? Is it separate? Yeah, what about the New York City Housing Authority? Is that a separate, are those separate expenditures? Is that part of the city budget? Could you give us some sense of the question of, for example, homelessness and homeless services? How much of the budget is spent on those expenditures?
So I can start out and then I might turn it over to Brian for more detailed information, but I'm just going to put in a plug for there's a link in Brian's presentation to our Understanding New York City's budget guide, which on page 7 has a very nice pie chart that shows you sort of the percentage of money that goes towards certain services.
Good.
So
Thank you.
that's yes. And Brian, in terms of NYCHA and H+H, yes, the city does it. They're not fully supported by the city, but they are largely supported by the city. So Brian, I don't know if you have more detail you want to provide.
Unfortunately, not much more off the top of my head. We can certainly get back to you on that. And another link that I'll point you to that's in the presentation is to our fiscal history tables, which have spending by agency for the past, I want to say 40 years. I think it goes back to 1980, at least 2000. So I think that you mentioned several of the ones that would come to mind as high spending agencies other than DOE, such as the uniformed agencies, the Department of Homeless Services and Social Services. But I'm sorry, I can't quote numbers off the top of my head tonight, but would be happy to get back to you.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, the New York City Housing Authority budget is not within the New York City budget.
No, sorry, but we do provide support.
Yes, we
Right?
do. Some of their budget derives from city money, but the
Yes.
full Housing Authority budget, you're not going to find it in the mayor's preliminary budget. You'll find what the city contributes to housing, but the housing also gets money from the federal government, used to get from the state. I don't know if it still does. And I don't know what the HHC budget, is that within the city budget or is it
We
also?
provide some, well, it's a state created entity. It's sort of what they call a covered organization. So we do provide subsidies, but it's not a city agency.
Right.
In the
So what we
same-
would have in the New York City budget is the city's subsidy. for
Exactly,
HHC,
exactly.
But it's the HHC budget.
And just to
Standalone.
put in another plug for some of our work, we just published sort of recently a piece on NYCHA and the sort of changes that are going on there in terms of how the trust fund that's being created is sort of being privatized, as somebody might have mentioned that something about, yeah. So there's a good piece on our website about NYCHA funding.
Yeah, okay, Layla.
Thank you, Burt. Thank you to the presenters. Very good and very insightful presentations. My question has to do with the Department of Education budget. Leonie, you did explain that last year the City Council actually rushed into approving a budget that was actually very dissatisfying to lots of parents and advocates. And then subsequently, the City Council said that they had made a mistake. They asked to revote, that was not granted. And now we have a chance to actually rectify the mistake from last year. Can you actually talk a little bit about how does that work? What is being rectified? What is the City Council going to do based on, you know, the positions that they have taken last year, and what can we do to make sure that, you know, they vote the most robust possible budget for education, given that last year's was really problematic?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we helped do last year is after we actually sued the city in court. Parents and teachers sued because the way the City Council had approved the budget before the Panel for Educational Policy, which is our school board, violated the law, violated the state law. And we actually won in the Supreme Court. And then the city appealed to the appellate court, and the appellate court said we were absolutely right, that they had violated the law, but they didn't make them restore the funding or have a revote, because they said it would be too chaotic for teachers and students to have those funds restored, which is, of course, is ridiculous because the chaos was created by the cuts, the budget cuts, not having the budget cuts restored. I don't know that the city council intends to rectify the mistake that they made last year. We are pushing for that along with other groups, including the Alliance for Quality Education and the Chancellor's Parent Advisory Council, which represents all the PTAs in the city. I don't know what they're going to do. We're hoping very much that they don't allow any more cuts to school budgets. But a lot of people were fooled last year because the mayor kept on saying that there would be no budget cuts to schools. I think even the IBO came out with some very confusing information, which was repeated by reporters about lack of budget cuts to schools, even though it was very clear in the budget to us that there were going to be big cuts to schools. And I don't know what's going to happen this year because, again, the DOE budget is so non-transparent that they managed to fool a lot of people, including things about vacancy reductions. I mean, this is an ongoing issue in which they cut the school budgets drastically, and then there are a lot of vacancies that are not filled in the teaching force, and then they don't allow those teachers to be hired, either teachers that have retired or teachers who have left the system. And then they claim that they didn't really cut the budget because they didn't lay off any teachers. So it's very, very confusing. I still don't know what that 225 million in terms of vacancy reductions is going to mean, but I think it's very suspicious. I wish the IBO would come out with some clarity about it. But that's the way they're squeezing agencies throughout the city. They're saying, okay, we're not cutting your budget, but the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, is not allowing them to hire, to fill positions that are empty, even though those positions may be budgeted for. And that way they're squeezing the city's, not just the teaching force, but the staff in all the city agencies to the bone. And it's very confusing, and I don't have any great answers. I've gone over the budget for years, and we still don't know, when a budget is adopted, exactly what the cuts are going to look like at the school level. They did promise this year to the city council that they're going to tell them what the cut's going to be at the school level before the final vote. We will see whether that happens or not. But there are lots of ways that they can play tricks, especially with the federal money, which they don't really report on in the same way as they report on the state and the city budget money funding. So it remains a very big mystery as to what's going to happen. And I don't know whether the city council will restore the cuts from last year. I'm not going to say they won't, but it's a long shot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie, would you like to go ahead for a couple of minutes and say what the community board process is in terms of the budget?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Some familiar faces here. I'm Leslie Bogosian Murphy. I sit on Community Board 4, which, as many of you know, covers Hell's Kitchen and most of Chelsea with Burt. So Burt is such a respected member of the Community Board. When he calls and tells me to come on a Zoom, I have to get on. So I am here today to talk about the budget. In my role on the Community Board, I am second vice chair. So automatically, the second vice chair assumes the role of chair of what we call the budget task force. So what we're talking about here in this Zoom, or what I've heard so far since coming on, is very macro, right? This is the big overall New York City budget, and we're talking over about $103 billion, right? I mean, this is more than most countries. What CB4 does, or what every community board does, is we whittle it down or narrow it down to a few steps of, in that budget, how that budget gets trickled down and trickled down and trickled down to our community. So what we do on the community board is very micro. It's micro, which is, I think, helpful, because sometimes you see exactly where dollars are going exactly, at least in our district. So throughout the year, we have a bunch of committees. There's transportation, there's parks, there's DSNY is covered. And we go through a lot of topics, whether it's planting tree beds to more service, greater services for garbage removal, or a lot of DOE topics. And then over the year, we write letters, we recommend, we opine on what we think our district needs, what Chelsea needs, what do they need more park staff in certain, in Chelsea Water, well, that's would be state, but in other parts of the area. And then when it comes to our budget task force, we get into a room or a Zoom room these days, and we prioritize what the district needs. And this could be anything from after-school programs to very simple things like a curb cutout on 36th Street. I mean, we get very, very micro. And then we hand in a very, very big, long list to the city. And it goes not only to the city and the mayor's office, but it goes to the related agencies. So if we have, let's see, if PS 33, we have a request for PS 33 for some sort of after-school programming. That's obviously very, very micro in the whole big DOE budget. But we ask specifically for that after-school program, PS 33, and it goes on our list and it goes to Department of Education. After we hand in all of these requests, then as you guys know, and I'm sure it was talked about, the mayor and the city comes out with its proposed budget overall, the overall city budget. And then we get the list back with notations, funded, not funded, can't be funded now. We get a lot of those. And then we go back to the drawing board and then we write a response to the city's proposed budget. So what we do is kind of what you see every day. Yes, there's the police, budget. There's the DOE, these huge chunks of the money pie. But what the community boards do, and our community board specifically, is we line item the micro asks, and then usually we attach an amount to it. So that's pretty much what we do in a nutshell. And we do, and by the way, those meetings are open to the public. The public can come and comment on them. They can comment on how we prioritize the budget. What we've done the last 2 years as a community board, which has been very helpful, is we've sent out a survey and we've asked residents, what is important to you? We're not asking you for money, numbers or figures, but if we were to prioritize budget needs or budget asks, what would be important to you? And the last few years, Burt, what is it? I think number one has been public safety, I think by a wide margin. DSNY, trash pickup has been up there. Homeless services, those, and housing, affordable housing. Those are the three or four biggies that we've been seeing in the last few years. And we try and not only address those in our statement of district needs, but then we push. We push for them. We really advocate, not just to the mayor's office, but to our connections in Manhattan to the different agencies to see what they could do. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I hope that kind of gives a little bit of an overview on what's, in a small way, what we do kind of block by block.
Tito, you have a question?
Yeah, to the community board person, I'm very bad at names, but you were excellent in explaining the process. So I want to know, how involved is the community in this process? I know there's a community board and there are members of the community board, but how much does the community board involve the community in these process? Because as you stated, what the community board does is recommend, and without the mobilization of the community, it's not going to go very far.
That's a really, really good question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. And I'll be very honest, and Burt can probably attest to this. When we have our budget task force meetings, meaning when we prioritize what we went over for the whole year and we're kind of forming our asks, it's open to the community. They're public meetings, but I have to tell you, I don't think that there's really much community participation at that level. Though we would love it if there was more. But I will say, and this is part two to answer your question, all the asks that we are handing in, that we are submitting, has been gone over by committee throughout the year before, most all of them. So that is where usually we get the community participation. So in March, right, if we're talking about, let's see, if we're talking about a park in March, and this park has, faulty playground equipment, and we need more playground equipment, that would have probably been not only at a committee meeting, but it would have went to full board, there would have been a letter, and that's where a lot of the community would come and talk about this playground and the value of it, and if the need is real. So then to answer your question, all these conversations and all this dialogue is then taken at the end of the fiscal year, well, when we are going to submit our statement of district needs, and we refer to those conversations that the community had previously. They can always comment again on it, but so I guess the answer was a little bit of two. I hope that answered your question. There is community participation. We always wish there was more, but yeah, we really encourage that.
So my question was more like, what role does the community board has in mobilizing the community for particular issues that affect us all? I mean, Layla, who's on Community Board 5, she did an incredible job at helping mobilize the community to fight those terrible towers that they wanted to build here. And I'm wondering, because I'm not involved with your community board, does your community board mobilizes the community? That's really the question.
I mean, I think Burt can also, and David, I see David is on, he's on Community Board 4 as well. I absolutely think that when there are big issues like that, not necessarily the microfinance asks, but big issues like that, we just had, our Community Board 4 had a big, we had a press conference recently regarding affordable housing. Affordable housing has been a very, very, very big topic on our community board, both in Hell's Kitchen and in Chelsea. And not only do we make a very strong effort to mobilize the community in a topic like that, but we actually, and I think we're one of the only community boards, Burt, maybe I could be wrong, that has its own affordable housing plan to give to the electeds to say, this is what our community needs. And to your, I guess, to your question, kind of like a little muscle, right? Like a little muscle, a little like advocacy.
Right.
And that's what we did, or that's what we are doing with affordable housing. And we've done it with other topics too. So yes, when it's a topic that's very, very important, that's very relevant, we're I think our community board, along with Layla, the CB5, is very strong in that regard. I mean, I like to say we're very strong in that regard as mobilizing the community.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We Community Board 4 is the only community board, the first community board to have a complete affordable housing plan and get it out there. Other community boards now, once we got the press after us, other community boards are reaching out to us. Well, how did you do it? Can you help us? Da, 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 da. It's been a very, very important issue for Hell's Kitchen in Chelsea.
And I will say, it was actually written up in the New York Times as an example of how community boards could work and could do more than just, vote, hey, we don't want these, motorcycles here, whatever. Like it was actually very proactive. Not only did the New York Times write up, but I believe Mark Levine, who is our Manhattan Borough President, took great elements of that. And I think he, I don't think I'm speaking out of school, he would say this, took elements of that and used it in his own Manhattan-wide affordable housing plan. And I don't think that's a small thing. I mean, that was a pretty big document and a big effort.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd
Lindsay.
like you to consider community land trust.
Okay, any additional questions for our presenters,
Very good.
the IBO people? And there she is. I was looking at my screen, sorry. Leonie. Okay, because I think they've been great presentations, leaving us with lots of questions, which I think are always the best kind of presentation, that we don't get all the answers, but we just get wired. I want an answer for that. Oh, and so Lisa, you said, well, look at Brian's links. We can get some more detailed reports there. Layla, you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you so much. If I can just add one little point. Over the course of this whole Penn Station debacle, Community Board 5 actually reached out to IBO, and we actually asked IBO to do a report on the funding scheme that was part of the state plan. And I have to tell you guys that these guys rock, and I want to see it publicly. They issued, first of all, they crunched the numbers. They did it entirely independently. They didn't have to ask for permission. They didn't have to, they felt that it was within their chartered mission. They went to work. They issued it in their own timeline, which, I mean, we wanted it much sooner, but they were like, you know what? No, don't rush us. This is going to be our timeline. And the report that they issued was just absolutely phenomenal because it is entirely independent, entirely accurate, entirely factual, and it was incredibly powerful. So I want to publicly thank you. You guys are amazing. It is just fantastic to have, such an independent body that is, publicly funded. And, I think that more people should know the great power of what you deliver. And I think we should use it more often. Not that I want to overwhelm you guys with more work. I know that you're working already extremely hard, but, I just wanted to profess my love for all the great work that you do. So thank you.
Very kind of you. That was a big group effort led by Sarah Stefanski. And
Yes.
it was, we really appreciate comments like that. And yes, we're here to answer complex questions like that. We do take our time. I should tell you all that we have a new director for the first time in 22 years. Her name is Louisa Chafee, and she started March 1st. So we're working on being sort of more accessible to wider groups of folks that are interested in the city budget, and just stay tuned for more great, accurate information coming from us. There's some changes coming, including to our website, which we're all really excited about. So, but thank you for that. We really appreciate that comment.
Sure you didn't expect that when you accepted the invitation tonight. You get such a compliment like that.
A little love letter.
Compliment.
If we don't make some people angry, we're not doing our job. So,
But you gotta make some people happy too.
Yes,
Layla was very
exactly. We'll take it where we can get it.
Okay, good work, good work. Any additional comments, questions? Anybody want to say something to anybody else?
I think that David has his hand up, Burt.
Oh, David, yes, yellow against your green wall. I didn't see it, sorry.
No, I just wanted to thank all the presenters, and it's great to see Leslie. A point of information, community board meetings are recorded and you can listen to them on YouTube. So let's say you have a conflict and you can't attend a community board meeting, but you want the information, they're on YouTube and it's recorded. And Burt, thank you for providing this program to us. And the presenters were great. Brian and everyone, Leslie, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you, David. And I'll repeat something that Layla said at the beginning in reference to her award. None of us do it by ourselves. I didn't bring everybody together. We all worked together, the program committee, to bring this on. But, and thank you for the compliment, David. Thank you for the thing. Okay. And because of the time of year, it's still light out. You can go out and play. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
having me.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all.
Thank you.
Have a
Have a
great
good
night.
See you from
evening.
now. Okay. Bye
Thanks.
now.
Bye.